Hey everyone, so I'm going to continue talking a bit deeper down the rabbit hole about are we just, here's a question that some scientists ask and believe. You come across this, is this what you're calling reality? Is it what we call a simulation? Is it like we're just a computer program, or I would say a lot of scientists say a biological simulation. So it's a simulation occurring through a biological program. Um, with a scientific hat on, putting on my science hat, I don't know if you can see that. There's a lot of evidence that would support the idea that there is no free will, that we are all just biological programs. What? However, because, as I've said, I came into this, well, whatever, aware of it, that I have this other perception, I know that's not the case. But I can't justify that scientifically, because scientific knowledge can only observe. When I talk about our perception, our intellect, is what I say inside the box. It can't look outside the box. You can't see outside the box of our, we'll call it reality, um, with intellect. You have to have this other perception, and I've said that's an emergent property that a lot of people don't have, so they can't perceive that and they just think you're crazy. So it's like I say, the red blue planet. If I come from the red planet and I meet someone from the red planet where you only see red, and the blue planet where you only see blue, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm from the red planet, I've never heard of this blue. You're crazy, crazy blue thinking delusional person. um So, a thought experiment I did with that is, I imagine you meet someone that is blind, and they've been blind from birth, they've never seen, and you're talking about your trip to the Grand Canyon, and they say, well, what's the Grand Canyon like? Can you describe it to me? Mostly you're going to talk about, what it looks like, but they've never seen. How could you convey to them what it's like to see the Grand Canyon, what it's like to, say, see stars or something beautiful, if they've never seen? The answer is you cannot. Okay, this is I say this all the time, but this is what I mean. You only understand what you've experienced. Experience being something through your senses. If you don't have that sense, you can't experience it. Um, you know, if an alien comes down and they've got, I don't know, other senses, they could have other ways of perceiving the universe that we do not have. Maybe they have electromagnetic wave type perceptions or something else, right? So we are limited by our perception of the universe is limited by the senses that we have, but it's not. We have to be aware of that limits. We call metaphysics. We have to be aware of what it is we are using to perceive, and it is limited. Um, so there is no way to bridge that. So then you get to this word like, well, is that like a faith? Like, am I saying I have a faith that I have this perception? It's not a faith, because it's not something that I can't perceive. It's something I can perceive. It's like seeing a different color other people can't see. I know I see it, but there's no way for me to bridge that. Um, there's no way to make a person who cannot see a color that we know of. So that's why I'm never going to try and convince anybody of anything I have to say, because it's a question of all I can do is say what I perceive and what I know. So going back to my original question, I know that we are not just, this isn't some biological simulation, but there is a lot of air quotes truth. It's not all or nothing to the idea that we are mostly biological computers. So I talked about the idea of babies, they know how to start crawling. We could call this instinct. All animals, you watch all animals, they have instinct. They have these inbuilt behaviors. Where do they come from? Where are those behaviors coming from? Is there like little programs in the brain? I said you have an original brain, we could call the primal brain, or your nervous system. Scientists have tried to understand how instinct works, but I'll say this, I'm pretty blunt when it comes to science, that you know, they probably can fool most people who haven't studied much science that they know the answer, but they don't. Like a lot of the very fundamental questions, the origin of life, or for example, how when your body is being grown, how each cell knows to be what each cell differentiation. We don't. There's a lot of really big questions that we really don't know the answer to. We can sound and write great big papers, and people can be professors and PhDs and get prizes, but that doesn't make you know the truth. This is unfortunately another nature of the truth. It can't be determined by authority. Just because you have high status, it doesn't mean you know the truth. It has to stand on its own 2 feet, as we say in science. It has to stand up to scrutiny. And when it comes to, for example, instinct, we truly don't know how this is working. But it does appear that a large percentage of what is instinct is somehow encoded into genetic code in the nervous system. Now, so the key question comes is, well, is it 100% of that behavior? Because if it is, then there's strongly an argument that we are just biological computers. We don't have any free will, and what we perceive as us thinking and making decisions is all predetermined. Okay. Very complicated to explain all that, how that would work, but there's a lot of scientists that really believe that. So you can look at, so I said I had identical twins, so what was very obvious to me immediately was that there were these huge differences, so then that's a problem for that argument. So then the argument has moved to, well, it must be the environment that they experienced in the womb was different, and that leads to these differences. Okay, because if they're identical and this is encoded genetically, then their instinct and everything about their personality initially should be the same, but it's very clear from looking at identical twins that that is not the case. And there's studies on this also. So now the explanation for that is, well, it's the environment in the womb. But honestly, it really doesn't stand up at all, particularly since a lot of the brain development hasn't occurred in the nervous system of the brain when these personality traits, these differences are visible. So this supports my understanding, my perception, as I've said to you, that you come here with we could call it a personality, from what your higher self, your symphonic self. Now, but what happens is that we'll call that your higher self personality, your symphonic self, has to come into this body, this genetic machine, and then it has to adapt to your environment. And at that point, there is a lot of we could call it coding into how you adapt to the environment. It kind of, like I said, it forms a code that in most people becomes what you perceive as your identity, who you are. Let's say I'm born in England, and my mom and dad are a teacher and something else, a doctor. That's going to influence you, ultimately, your perceptions about who you are. What people define themselves through their job and their interest in all these things, but those things are very heavily biologically influenced through adaptation to your environment, like who your parents were, the school you went to, the culture, your interactions. And if I put you, so an example I said to someone once who was a Christian, bringing religion to it as an example, I said, if you were born in an Islamic country, do you think you'd still be a Christian? And they thought about it and they're like, well, I guess not. So these things that people are using to identify themselves, their religions, their politics, their jobs, their hobbies, their likes, these things are essentially what I call this cultural download from your environment, and not choices that you made. So you can't, if you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, I'd like to review that movie at some point. I think it was a very good attempt to convey some of these ideas, but I don't, again, because it's fiction, most people are not going to, it's not in their rock, as I say, they're not going to fully perceive what the authors were saying in their rock. A lot of that got miscommunicated, but there's a line in there when Neo goes back into the Matrix for the first time, and he's looking out the window and he sees a noodle place that he really liked, the noodles. And basically the conversation he's having with Trinity is that the realization that wasn't air quotes real, that was just an experience, a journey that he had, And Neo says to Trinity, what does this mean? What does this mean? Like, and she says, well, basically it means the Matrix. In other words, that experience journey you had can't tell you who you really are. And the same thing, the identity that most people have right now, listening to me, the identity you perceive yourself to be is just an experience that you are having. It's not it can't tell you who your true self is. Okay? This is what Lao Tzu was trying to get at about in True Taoism, not all the books that other people have written about. This is the essence of what he's getting at. The only way to discover, how can you discover your true self then? If you've got to throw off this identity that you were adapted into in your environment, your cultural download, how can you even discover this personality that first came into this biological machine? Very difficult. Okay, so this is what I mean by deprogramming. You know, these are the things I try and explain, but you can't get to that. Every experience that you have in some way, at some level, is showing you your truth, you could call your higher self. But only if you can not be reacting like this biological program, which, you know, in my observation is 90 to 95% of people that I've ever met is largely a biological, their reactions are largely like if I had created a machine with programming and their reactions are just a program. I don't know if that's what the authors meant about why they used that in the Matrix, whether that's why they picked that paradigm of the idea of programs. I would love to talk to them and have some questions. A lot of people said they would like to hear me interview them. But yeah, it's a harsh thing. People don't want to. It's not saying any people who are able to change it are better or whatever. It's just the nature of what this is. So this is, I talk about the trains and stations. So you get on a train and you have experiences. What I mean by that is, you know, you have no choices. That is the running of this biological program. If you have no ability to change, to observe and change what this program is doing. If you could get off the train at a station, maybe you can change trains and have a different experience. So I remember talking to this girl Nadia, we were talking about this for a minute, for like half an hour, and we got into discussion. So fate, if something is fate, you can't change it. If something is free will, you have choices. They're dead opposites, they appear to be. But this is our minds fooling us. You can have fate and free will. How? You can have periods where it's fated to have experience and your biological program is just running through experiences. But then you can have moments where you get off the train and you can actually make a choice. And the more you become aware of this, certainly it was true for myself and other people that I've met that are similar, the more you have an emergent understanding of this, the more you can recognize you're standing on a station and you can make this choice and change trains. That's a whole deep conversation. It's getting deeper because the color is getting darker and darker. I'm living in permanent thunderstorms right now. Yeah. So no, I don't perceive that any of us are purely that this is a simulation or a biological program, because that's our perception. And even if I just looked at science, that reasons I said at the beginning would make me question it. Now, at a deeper level, we could also discuss that the mind is a quantum computer, and because quantum physics, or how quantum physics works, which we will discuss, there would always be differences. There would always be a probability that people would think outside their programming to a certain degree. It just wouldn't be that much, but to a certain degree. So even if you could create 1 million clones who are identical biology and I gave them identical environments in every single way, there would still be differences because of quantum physics. So that's another reason I don't agree with that thinking. So I've already said I know what we are. So the thing is, it's very hard for people to perceive is that none of us are actually so-called here. We're not actually here. Like I'm saying, your true self, your higher self is, we could use the word manifesting this experience. The easiest thing why I use this analogy is that shut your eyes and you fall into a dream. When you're in a dream, it seems, air quotes, real. It's just as real as what you are now. It's a shift of your consciousness into that dream. That this experience you are having, that this identity and this life journey and experience, is a similar shift of perception, of consciousness. So I think a lot of people really struggle with this one. Because it seems like you're looking around and you're like, but I'm here, I can hit myself and I'm here. But again, you could have a dream and you could sense all those things. Or I said the other idea is you put on a virtual reality headset, and if it was as lifelike as this, it would seem the same as well. So what we're these, we could call it consciousness, these entities, this symphonic self, that it has the capacity to manifest this. We don't require a headset, and it's not a dream. I don't fully understand how we are doing this, but the quantum physics rules of this experience domain that we are manifesting, those rules, we are creating them. And it's interesting because when I knew this as sort of 8, 10, 12 years old, but I hadn't studied quantum physics, but now quantum physics is discovering a lot of things to be the case. So when we go through that, there's something called the observer effect in quantum physics that actually shows this effect to me. There's debate about this, but for me, that's like, how could I possibly predict that and then discover that in science? So it would have seemed so unlikely, like what quantum physics seems so unlikely, and yet it's then confirming what these perceptions that I have are to be the case even in science. So basically what quantum physics has discovered is that the more we try to observe what is going on at the smallest level, that our own consciousness affects what we can observe. This is the observer effect. So I will go through all of this stuff at some point. My God, it really is dark now, right? This is so much my conscious. So I then ran experience my whole life, and with other people, where we try to influence this experience in this domain, what I call quantum manifestation, and confirm to all of us that indeed all of us, all our consciousnesses all the time, are influencing the journey we're on. Now, how that differs to, like, people talk about positive attitudes. If you just think positively, that's very different, okay? And I will have to go through all that. The thing is, it's not about, oh, I'm going to manifest $1 million. It's what you can manifest, what you can influence in your life journey has to relate to your life journey. If your life journey is meant to be this, where you experience ill health so you can learn something, or the loss of a child so you can learn something, or some otherwise difficult event that most people would try to avoid, you cannot use positive thinking or quantum manifestation to avoid that, because it's part of your fate, your path that you have to go through. So what I say is that, and also then people are blaming themselves. Well, I tried really hard I guess I'm just not being positive enough. You can only manifest what is within the scope of the journey that you're supposed to be taking. And it's really about those stations I'm talking about. It's at those points on those stations are the only points you can actually manifest a path, a difference on the path, because you have learned something you were meant to come here and learn. This is so dark, it's making me laugh. Now, another phenomenon I talk about, and this is just really chatting, is what I call getting blocked, which is people sometimes get to a point where they're totally blocked on their path and they can't make any choices, and then they get exited, and it could be suicide, but it could be suicide through risky behaviors. It's suicide through ill health that they are manifesting. That doesn't mean all ill health is something people are manifesting, I'm saying, but that can happen, that people get blocked. So cancers and serious health, my own chronic health that I went through that nearly killed me, that started when I was about 12 and went away and came back, and each time it got worse and worse. until I nearly died when I was 40. I'll go into this at some point. I went through a long process. I was so ill for 3 years. I just couldn't even think. I couldn't form words barely. Someone was saying, a friend of ours, I remember you couldn't even remember your name. I was like this for 3 years, and I was in agonizing pain, and I had 3 young kids, which was, just loved my kids to death, and that was stressing me out. My poor wife was stressing out, and I just couldn't see any way out of this. It was like this room. It was getting darker and darker. uh, that's a long story. So that's an example of a transformative experience that I needed to go through, that I was meant to go through on my life journey. I didn't realize that at the time, but I certainly, as I started to get through it, I saw why I needed to go through this, and I'll talk about it. What that teaches you. Often the things that are the most difficult in your life experiences are the things that can potentially transform your perceptions and teach you the most. But if we fight against them and say, oh, why is this happening to me? And I certainly went through a long period of about 5-6 years of that. And I've seen this in so many people I've tried to help with chronic health, until one day I realized, how much of it was to do with just the nature of who I am and how I think in this world. And just learn to, and trying to accept that. There's a lot to talk about, really a massive amount about that, but it showed me how important the mind is, this interaction of the mind through epigenetics, as it's called, with our bodies. Our physical bodies, our mind, ultimately at quantum level are the same thing. So don't fully buy into Western medicine's perception of, the body is this thing where you can just sort of take drugs, and that, because your mind is so powerful that in this interaction, that if you don't tackle that, then these problems will always come back. You might cure the cancer for a year, but then it could come back if the mind is a part of that. So mind-body connection, or I call body-mind connection, which I will go into all of this. But yeah, people get blocked, and I think that, and then they often develop quickly and die out of this because they can't complete the journey that they were here, so they're going to come back. If you want to believe, which a lot of people do, that maybe this is just it, this is my one life, okay, then I would, if I believed that, which I know not to be the case, then I would live my life maybe more hedonistically and differently and selfishly. But it isn't the case. We're all on this evolutionary path I've described up this mountain. I've talked more about it. The aim is ultimately, like I said, if you want to take Jesus or someone like that as the ultimate goal, how they lived their life, not the words twisted into by men in the Bible. Forget words talking the talk's irrelevant, but look at the example of how that person lived. Then that's a very difficult thing to achieve for most of us, given what happens in our lives. It's easy, as I said, in theory, but wait until you have, chronic health, pain, or you lose all your money and you haven't got a job and you don't know how to get out of it and you're stressed. These are the things that they are actually our higher selves giving ourselves opportunities to learn through these challenges, okay? But when we can't perceive that, then they make us feel anxious and depressed and stressed, all these negative things that affect our body. Once we can perceive them as opportunities to learn from them, and it takes a lot of work. I'm not saying it's just like that. Often something will happen in my life. It's taken me a long time, and I'm like, well, what am I trying to teach myself here? Why does this keep happening? It doesn't just come to you. You have to work at it, chisel away, as I said, at the rock. But it's not everything that happens to in your life is your higher self. You have to be able to figure this stuff out, and I will talk more about this, but it tends to be things that keep repeating for no good reason. You're like, why does this keep happening? It could be near relationships, it could be financially, it could be many things. It depends where you are in that material, intellectual, higher self journey, what is going to happen, because everybody's at a different point of what they need to learn. So I know it's very difficult. I mean, I'm someone that gets very attached, like animals, people, whatever. It's very difficult to deal with loss. That's part of this experience, again, to try and learn from. I'll talk about some of my losses and transformative experiences with that at some point. But by avoiding that, like people in our world, like everyone is frightened of death and they're trying to avoid it, you're missing out again on transformative experience. If you never let yourself attach, again, you can't have that experience of losing and working through that. So again, this is what I was talking about. The system essentially is trying to almost condition people to believe the objective is just trying to get through this life without getting too hurt, which means don't get too attached, don't feel too much, don't have too much empathy. The sort of dead opposite of what I said about that Jesus model. Just try and acquire shiny things and be comfortable and have security, and this is the objective of life. For some people, that in the material phase, that is indeed what they should be doing. But for most of us, we're here to work on much harder things. So that's going to involve, like I said, pain and suffering and ill health, and we shouldn't be trying to avoid those things. Attachment, loss, these are the tools by which our higher selves are trying to teach us. And if we then try to just plug in like those material phase people, we're just hiding from what we're here to learn, and we'll just, the thing is, you probably don't believe me, but you're just going to repeat this until you actually deal with it and learn that. So there is no hiding from it. You just be doing this forever until you can do these difficult things. And the further along you are at the mountain, the more difficult the things you will experience were. I'm sure Jesus didn't particularly enjoy being nailed to a cross and publicly crucified, for example. I mean, my whole experience with ill health destroyed my life from one perception. It took away my career, it took my ability to work at that point, it made my relationships difficult, it made everything about my life, so difficult that you contemplate suicide. But these are you have to go through these experiences sometimes. These are unnecessary experiences that you're trying to avoid. And if you look at a lot of spirituality and religions, they're then trying to convince everybody now that that's what you should be doing. Even the religions I love, it's all about trying to avoid any kind of suffering at all costs, and God's going to provide. If you just pray to God, He's going to make sure you don't suffer in any way. He's going to take care of you financially and health-wise and everything. Believe me, no God is going to do that. The consciousness that we are all part of, that is manifesting this experience domain, one of, believe it or not, infinite different experiences we can have, wants us to elevate and learn, and knows that the only way to do that as you go along this journey is to have what you perceive as suffering and difficult experiences. So no, that is not going to happen unless that is meant to be in your journey. Okay, this is kind of a long rambling discussion, but there's no, as I talk about chiseling away the rock, there's just more chiseling away the rock, trying to get across some perceptions and ideas that I commonly come across. It's kind of this whole ridiculousness of of the model they've created of mind slavery people, that the objective is to work, but most people are miserable. But don't worry, because when you retire you can be happy for a bit, or you can go on holiday once a week where you can be happy. I mean, that first of all again prevents most people from figuring out why they're here and what they're trying to work on, because they're too exhausted and busy with this life. But most people may not even ever get to that positive bit, so then they're just it's not a waste. You're still having experiences and you're still learning some things, but the goal is to get up the mountain. And instead what's happening there is you're just sort of going like this around the mountain, maybe just round and round and slightly up the mountain. So yeah, I've talked a lot about that in other videos. This is the biggest problem for me with the system as it is right now, is it's preventing most people from being able to go more up the mountain that they should be doing. Okay, I'm going to stop this one here because it's so dark. I think I'm going to disappear completely. Okay, everyone, take care.